I was a weird kid. One of the things that I was really interested in as a kid was history and the environment and social issues, which seems weird for a child. So I spent a lot of time in my tiny town of West Liberty, West Virginia, which has a population of 1,000 people, just trying to discover more things about the world constantly. I spent a lot of time with my sister and brother doing weird stuff, that rural kids do, like running around and climbing pine trees and getting stuck in the pine tar and playing with chickens and all sorts of rural kid experiences that I very much value now. But I've always been fascinated with history in the past, not like the clunky details. I understood from a really young age that we are shaped by all the people that came before us. So it's important to understand where we came from to inform who we are and how to get to the next place.
I'm Devyn Whitmire. People from South Carolina, like myself, are proud of their state and everything it has to offer. But even we don't know every nook and cranny. So we're traveling to the most charming places in the Palmetto State. Some of them you know, and some of them even we have never heard of. From Discover South Carolina, it's the Palmetto Porch. We're in Mitchelville, a place with a proud and resilient history. We are sitting inside the Cherry Hill School near Mitchelville. This was the first school constructed for African Americans on Hilton Head Island. It's very small. It's just one room. And I'm sitting here with you, Katherine Seeber. Katie, welcome to the porch.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from?
Yes, originally I'm from West Virginia, which I'm very proud of. I'm from the best Virginia, I think. And I've been working as an archaeologist across the U.S. for a long time now. And so I've done work all over the southeastern parts of the United States. And I'm lucky enough to have been working here on Hilton Head for, almost a decade now.
Can you walk us through your early life?
So I, as a kid, always wanted to be an archaeologist.
You knew as a kid?
Yeah. So nobody knows where it came from. I have a report from the first grade that says that I want to be an archaeologist because I was always trying to do archaeology outside. And so I've never deviated from that path. It was the thing that I've wanted to do since probably I was 4.
What did you think being an archaeologist would be like in your mind as a child? Was it like Indiana Jones?
No, I knew he was a bad archaeologist.
You knew?
Yeah, he stank. He's breaking stuff all the time.
True.
What is his problem? There was no note-taking. My dad's a scientist.
Yeah.
And so I knew it would be outside, and I definitely knew there was going to be a lot of physical labor involved, but I don't think I knew the parts that ended up being the coolest for me. So when you're younger, the discovery of digging and finding an artifact is incredible. The first time I did archaeology and found an artifact, I remember sitting that evening and just pondering reality, because it's very fascinating to hold something in your hand that the last time somebody held it was hundreds of years before you, or maybe even thousands. But as I have matured into my career, the things that are interesting are quite different. But I definitely had this urge to go on adventures and find things and learn things and do adventure stuff. I had no idea what that was going to be, but I was I'm going to do adventures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have. They just were not, Indiana Jones adventures.
Yeah, because you don't break stuff.
No. No, it's fundamentally such bad archaeology.
Amazing. Where did you attend school to study archaeology?
I went to a small state school in New York called the State University of New York at Potsdam. So when I was in high school finishing up, my dad was like, "Do you really want to do this archaeology thing?" And I was like, "Yes, there's nothing else that I'm going to do, Dad," which he found incredibly concerning because it's crazy. And nobody knew an archaeologist, so it's not like you could call anybody and be like, "Can you help my daughter get into this, whatever?" So he called his older sister, my Aunt Renee, and he was like, "She's still going to do it." She's still doing this archaeology thing. And she was like, do you know what? My best friend's husband is an archaeologist.
Shut up.
At Potsdam State, which is the college my dad went to because he's from New York.
Yeah.
And it is in the same town that she lives in.
Yeah.
And so my dad called this man. His name is Dr. Stephen Markesy. And he happened to have a spot available on this thing called a field school. So when you want to do a field-based science in undergraduate as a degree, you have to one summer go for 6 weeks. It's like a 6-credit course and do this field school to make sure that you want to do the job, but it's also, it's part of your training.
Yeah.
Because field-based scientists, you can read a lot, but like reading about a jellyfish and touching one is quite different. Reading about archaeology and touching is different. So I graduated high school. 6 days later, my dad drove me to this random place in Virginia. It turned out to be James Madison's home, author of the U.S. Constitution, President of the United States. And there was archaeology there working on looking for the homes of all the enslaved people who worked for the Madisons. I spent the entire summer digging, looking for a fence. Super boring. We didn't find the fence. We didn't find anything. I think I found a nail.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened next? You're through your degree program. What were your next steps?
So I went to college 2007 to 2011. And if we all remember, 2011 was right in the middle of the recession.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated, and the chances of me getting a job in archaeology were really low because it was a really difficult time in the economy and archaeology was very slow. So with a degree, a bachelor's degree in archaeology, which is what I had, there's like a few jobs that you can have. And one is like not archaeology, right? The other is something called CRM, Cultural Resource Management. So this is a whole field of jobs that most people don't know exist.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the United States and the United States, any form of our government wants to develop a project, or anyone wants to develop a project on state or federal land, you have to do archaeology first.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this entire field of people, there's like 30,000 of us, who spend our time traveling across the United States doing archaeology in service of this one thing called resource management. So I spent about 5 years traveling around the US, digging really precise holes for a little bit of money in very strange conditions. But it was an adventure because you get deployed like the military. So I spent a long time traveling around doing cultural resource management archaeology, which comes with no benefits, no health insurance. You're not a stable worker because everyone's a subcontractor of a subcontractor.
So how did that feel at the time, being in that role and feeling like you were going from gig to gig in a recession?
It was terrifying. You might not get anything out of this in the long run. And there's a possibility of like danger or serious harm or things like that. Like there's no health insurance. All of it was a concerning situation, but at the same time, I was learning incredible amounts of stuff. I found this community that I had never had access to anything like before in my life. And it's still one of the most joyful things I think I ever experienced.
So Mitchelville was the first town for freed people on Hilton Head Island. Can you give us some background on the area? Why is it important?
So Mitchelville was the first free Black town in the American South. And the distinction, the choice of those words is very intentional because there was free Black towns in free states in the North, but Mitchelville is a free Black incorporated town before the Emancipation Proclamation happened in the middle of the Confederacy. So all of that put together is a wildly special set of circumstances and didn't happen anywhere else. the Port Royal Sound was the headquarters of the Union Army's Department of the South. The Department of the South was Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. So everything, every interaction, every piece of intelligence, every time someone needed boots or food, every action, every choice about movements and troop movements was run out of Hilton Head Island. There was a fort right over here called Fort Wells. And in the first year of the war, a few months in, I think it's 6 months, November, the Union Army invaded here, took over the Port Royal Sound, established this fort. And within hours of Fort Wells becoming Union territory, because this is the Confederacy, there was like 300 refugees, Black refugees around the fort, right? So if you were an enslaved person here on this island or in the Port Royal Sound, and there was a possibility of having a life not fully enslaved, you probably were going to take it, right? Especially if you had kids or could make it. So people were walking and taking boats and trying to do anything they could to get to Fort Wells. And it was not because they were going to be free. There was no discussions of liberation at the first year of the war. It's because there was a chance they could work for money and be more free than they were on a plantation. So about a year of this goes on. And in that year, a refugee town was constructed around Fort Wells. And when I say refugee, I use that word because we can think in our minds of what refugee camps look like. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And this happened throughout the South. When they are in this refugee status, they are still property because the Emancipation Proclamation hasn't happened yet. A man named General Ormsby Mitchell was issued in September of 1862 to come here and take over operations because the man who had been in charge previously messed up a little bit. Mm. So General Mitchell was an astronomer. He was a professor. He was a staunch abolitionist, a person who really felt like there was a really good shot that Black folks were fully capable of living and taking care of themselves, which was novel. He walks into Fort Wells and he is horrified at the state of the refugee camps. It's full of dysentery, smallpox. There's no bathrooms. There's people living in abject poverty. And he is really upset by this because he realizes that there are so many possibilities to do this better. So Mitchell decides that he is going to take a portion of the Union-held territory here on this island and reserve it for Black folks to build their own town, which is completely novel. This is not a refugee camp. This is a town, right? And so in history, it's sort of like hard to distinguish, I think sometimes in our minds, the difference between a refugee camp or like a free Black town or whatever, but there's a huge difference between the town of Hilton Head and a refugee camp in Bosnia, right? That is what we're talking about here. So the land that we're sitting in, all the way to the ocean, all the way past the airport here, was reserved for free Black citizens to build a town. And so not everybody was a Mitchellville resident. You had to apply. And Mitchellville was a place that over the next 7 years was built into an incredible example of what Black folks were capable of producing without anyone telling them what to do, which was really important at the time because that was still a huge doubt in many people's minds.
So how did you find out about Mitchellville? Can you tell us about the first time that you visited this area?
Yeah. So like many other portions of my life, it was not a direct path, right? I came here to do archaeology at the Sea Pine Shell Ring. And I was also a representative of my university at a conference. A man named Charles Bogues arrived at my table in the book room and said, are you working on Hilton Head? I said, yes. He said, have you ever been to Mitchellville? And I hadn't heard of it. And he said, well, as a historian, that's not good. And so he said, when you come back with your students in the summer, you should come to our Juneteenth. That summer, I come down, I have my students, my professor and I are digging on the Sea Pine Shell Ring. And for Juneteenth, we come to Mitchelville, which at the time was much smaller. So this park is only 33 acres of what was once a very large town. And those 33 acres now are mostly clear, but at the time it was basically you drive in and that's it. So I remember going and there was singing and there was dancing and it was a great celebration. And there was an archaeologist there named Dr. Cheryl LaRoche, who is a Black archaeologist who's done amazing work around DC and in Maryland. And it was very odd that she was there. I remember thinking like that, she's a very big deal. This is very odd. But she had connections to Mitchelville. And she asked me a lot of questions about how I felt about archaeology. And I was very frank with her. And my answers were, I guess, something that she liked, because she ended that with, do you want to do archaeology at Mitchelville? And I laughed. And I said, well, I have a lot going on in the Sea Pine Shell Ring. You know, that's my dissertation site. And I have 12 students right here. And she was like, well, Mitchelville is the first free Black town. So what about doing some work here? So I said that we would do a little bit of work for them while we had our equipment here, pro bono, because, you know, why not? So we came and we did like 3 days worth of work looking for the first church in Mitchelville. And then over a period of 2 years, I was slowly convinced to switch all my work to Mitchelville, which I'm very glad I did.
Why did you decide to work with the park leadership on the archaeological site, do you think?
Every once in a while, we're given opportunities that, again, are terrifying. Or not terror-inducing, but are very risky. Mitchelville was a big risk for me because I already had a project lined up. And frankly, taking on doing the archaeology for the first free Black town in the American South that's a lot of responsibility. That is a lot. But I remember talking to the board chair at the time, and the person that they hired the same year that I started working there, who was still the director, Ahmad Ward, and really realizing that there was a chance to contribute in a way that archaeology rarely has the chance to contribute now. So in the past, 100, 150 years ago, archaeology was a very well-known sort of science. It was sort of a thing that like rich kids did, and it's how we filled our museums with stolen stuff. There's a whole bunch of things to talk about there, but archaeology isn't typically the thing that we think of as contributing to society now. It is actually one of the most frequently asked questions by a very specific genre of person. Like, why do you do this job? What do you feel like you're contributing? And the answer is, I believe wholeheartedly, and I am an archaeologist because I believe this, that anthropology and archaeology have the opportunity to seriously address current social issues because they were born in the past. So we don't wake up with a clean slate as human beings. We wake up with all of the things that happened before us. And so when we have issues with class and race and gender and money and things that are very human, the only way to really deal with it is first to understand how it happened. And history books don't do that. It's not possible because they're compiled from the things that people wrote or pictures that people took in the past, but that's from someone's point of view, and it's usually one. Archaeology is the tool that we can use that eliminates that one point of view, because it takes us to a place where we have the opportunity to learn about many people's points of view in that specific moment in time. And so by doing archaeology at Mitchelville, I realized I could contribute something to the world around me, positive, that would make an impact to living people which is the only thing I really wanted to do in the first place. And the sea pine shell ring could do that as well. But there was a group of people standing in front of me who asked for assistance. And what greater opportunity do we have as scientists than to contribute to a community who wants our help? So I decided to do it because it was an incredible opportunity to use my skills for something that mattered.
Speaking of historical sites, this schoolhouse, children living in Mitchelville probably went to school here. What impact do you see coming from the preservation and excavation of these historical sites?
Historic sites like the Cherry Hill School and historic Mitchell Freedom Park, and there's many other sites on this island that talk about the Black history of Hilton Head, the Gullah Geechee history of Hilton Head. And I'm not Gullah Geechee, obviously, and I'm not Black. And so I don't have the ability to articulate the importance and the beauty and the depth in which having access to Gullah Geechee history as a Gullah Geechee Islander is meaningful. But I do know that in the greater realm, Hilton Head is consistently listed as one of the most wonderful vacation destinations in the world. We have millions of people, millions, I don't know the last count, but in 2020 it was something like 4 million, come here every year for vacation. And it's very difficult for islanders who have been here for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations, just in general, because if 1 million people descended on your hometown every year, it would be difficult, to say the least. But there's also erasure that happens with that. So underneath all of the mini golf courses and the Tanger outlets is a depth of history that provides a window and an opportunity into looking at the way that Black folks in this county shaped our nation. Like, there is nothing more American than the story of Gullah Geechee people in Beaufort County and other places as well, but I work here. There's so many things that come out of the Low Country that are American. And it's easy for that to get erased. You can build right over top of it and have no clue when you have something physically on the landscape. I have been conducting interviews of people who go on vacation to Hilton Head for years, or people who move here, because we have a large group of people who have moved here in retirement or have decided to relocate. And I've been told many, many times that there was nobody here before the bridge. There wasn't anybody here. The Army cleared this island. There wasn't any plantations here. I mean, isn't it amazing that we've created something from nothing? And that is an awful thing to perpetrate on a group of people who literally still live here. So places like this give us the opportunity to help articulate how incredible Gullah Geechee history is, not only so Gullah Geechee people who are living have access to it, but also the people who have chosen to come here or move here can understand the depth of what they're now stewards of. Because when you move to a place, you become part of the stewardship of that history. And in general, I think that is something that people enjoy. It's not a negative. Once people learn that they're living in a place that is so incredible, normally their response is, wow, that's really awesome. Because we all want to be part of something that's more than ourselves. And that's what taking care of history is. So I think having places like this on the landscape give us the opportunity to gather around them and have a meaningful experience in a way that is more difficult when there isn't a physical location. It's hard to stand in a Target parking lot and be like, this feels sacred. But underneath the Target parking lot, there's absolutely things there that could be, right?
When you first got there and throughout your time at Mitchelville,
Is there anything that you found at the site that was surprising? And what discovery or artifact maybe has stood out to you?
Yes. The first thing that we found that was absolutely riveting, and I didn't believe it for a while, is a type of artifact that we found in Mitchellville. So it's called collinaware. It's a type of ceramic made by enslaved Black folks in Virginia, South Carolina, and the Caribbean, and a little bit in between. But in general, that's where it occurs. A lot of times enslaved people were sometimes the only people on the islands or, out here for very much of their experience was basically like carving their lives out of wilderness. And by Mitchelville, which is 1862, there had been enslaved people here for 150 almost years. So they are well into a period where they don't need to be making ceramics. They're well into a period where they would have just been given, some plates and bowls that were bought from England. But I found collinaware, which is very weird. It's about 100 years out of context. So I found a little bit and I thought maybe I was not correct. My advisor also was like, maybe we don't know what we're looking at. But after analysis, we found a lot of it there. And so after all these years, our prevailing theory is that people who came to Mitchellville were refugees and couldn't bring a whole lot with them. And so if you are limited to what you can carry, it's going to be the things you absolutely need and maybe something that's very special. And, the study is ongoing. My hypothesis is that the people who came here chose to bring a collinaware bowl with them, probably because their grandmother or maybe their great-grandmother or their mother made it, because it was made 100 years probably before it was put in the ground. And that whole sequence of discovery was amazing. And it says a lot about humans and our choices and what we do as refugees. And I think we sometimes think about enslavement as people not having culture, but enslaved people here and everywhere else, of course, had culture. And so it's very hard to find an artifact that talks about all that at once.
So what is the current status of your archaeological dig at Mitchelville?
So Mitchellville, the park, Historic Mitchell Freedom Park, is in the process of developing a visitor center and a classroom center and a few buildings so that when you go, you can go into the visitor center, get information, just like any other historic site. But it is the only part of Mitchellville that is protected from development. So we're very conscientious about knowing that when we put anything in the ground at the park, we could be destroying the last of its kind evidence. So in lieu of excavating the entire Historic Mitchell Freedom Park, which was not possible, we used something called electromagnetic induction, which is a fancy way of saying it was picking up passive electricity. And I was able to find a lot of things left over from Mitchellville, which was shocking and amazing. And it is totally not what I thought it was going to be. I thought we would find some cooking hearths or things like that. And I was able to find the footprints of buildings, which is amazing. So we are very cognizant that there is a living, vibrant community who is descendant from Mitchellville. And so we're always making sure that when we do archaeology, we're interacting and making sure that I'm actually looking for questions that are relevant to Gullah Geechee folks instead of just what scientists are interested about. We will be making sure that the questions that we ask, just like I did for my dissertation and just like I did for previous excavations there, are relevant to the people that are related to it. And those sorts of questions are things about daily life and who is in Mitchellville. And spoiler alert, it's a lot of women, like way more women than anything else, because a lot of men are not living in Mitchelville. They're working for the Army or they're working off-site. And so if there's the predominant adult in Mitchellville's women, what are they doing all day? How are they making money? What does daily life look like? Those are the questions that will shape how we do that science.
Well, I have so enjoyed hearing from you today. I love hearing your story and wanting to be an archaeologist at 4, and you're doing it. You're here and you're doing it in South Carolina. And I know it's hard work, but we are grateful as locals for what you're doing. I'd love to kind of end our time with any final thoughts, whether it's about archaeology, Mitchelville, South Carolina, or yourself.
I am very privileged to work in South Carolina. I didn't ever imagine I would be living here and working here. That's bonkers. I am from mountains and not the ocean. But the thing about where I live here and the thing about the Low Country is that human beings have been making their life here for a really long time. Longer here than most other places in North America. So I feel like there is opportunity for every one of us to be more rooted to the world we live in. And that a lot of times comes through learning about where we live. And I've said this many, many times before. I said it earlier today. In North America, anywhere you put your feet is someplace someone was there before you. You've never been to a place there wasn't Native Americans. You've never been to a place there wasn't some sort of life that happened before you. And I think that that's really inspiring. And in this world where things are chaotic and we move all the time for work and we're not as rooted as we used to be, letting history be something that helps us feel connected to the world around us is a great way to be reminded of our humanity and how we are a part of something bigger.
To learn more about this and all the towns we're featuring on the show, visit scpalmettoporch.com. The Palmetto Porch is produced by Discover South Carolina in partnership with Pod People. Special thanks to our production team at Pod People, Lauren Luco, Ben Sauls, Lauren Sauls, Grace Pina, and Kim Wong.